Welcome to the Western Bowl podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of this series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled Spiritual Practice in a Human Body. The talk was given by Myosho Ginny Matthews on March 30th, 2024 via Zoom. Ginny was a student of Joshu Sasaki Roshi for 40 years. She took lay ordination in 2000, co-founded the Dharma Heart Center, and leads retreats, including those that have focused on strengthening women's practice. She is a dance teacher and choreographer and is featured in the book The Unknown She, 8 Faces of an Emerging Consciousness. In this talk, Ginny observes that relationship to the body is often ignored in spiritual practice. She speaks about the value of examining the relationship we have with our bodies on the path, about patterns that are ingrained in the body, about the middle way, which has to look different today than it did when Buddha lived in 500 BC. She talks about her experience with her teacher and notes that when we have compassion for ourselves, it spills out to others. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Ginny Matthews.
Well, thank you all for being here. And I guess it is a relevant topic. I think everyone who arrives here is in spiritual practice of some kind. And we definitely are all in a human body. That is a given. I must say that it's only been the last few years that I've been really examining my relationship to my ideas, my beliefs about spiritual practice and the human body. I think having been so immersed in a Buddhist practice, there were some things that went along with that I didn't necessarily examine so deeply. And I thought it was about time to look at that. I must say that I was first attracted to Zen back in 1973 when I was a youngster, because it was a physical practice. It did totally involve the human body. It didn't necessarily promise transcendence of the body. It did ask us to be in a relationship that was more conscious and more aware. And that's what Zazen was. That was the meditation. And the tools that I learned with Zazen were life-changing and life-enhancing and have kept with me. Basically, breath, which obviously is not going to happen unless you're in a human body. And my teacher, when he started his teachings in America, was trying to find a way to get across some essential Buddhist ideas with a population that had no idea about Buddhism back in the 60s and early 70s. So he came up with this wonderful phrase or idea, which is Buddha is the center of gravity. The only published collection of his talks is called that, Buddha is the center of gravity. It was published without his permission because his idea was that you don't read about these practices or about his particular teachings. You come to the Zen Center and practice with him. He had done a sesshin, which is a 7-day retreat at the Lama Foundation, and unbeknownst to him, they just published his teachings. Anyway, I love that term, Buddha is the center of gravity, because, it's a literal physical place, and obviously it's also a metaphorical place. But the other part of Chan or Chinese Zen that came to Japan as Zen is working with the hara, which is the abdomen area, which is where the center of gravity roots you to planet Earth. And that was also something that I, as a dancer, totally understood, In order to balance, in order to leap in the air, in order to turn, I had to understand where my center of gravity was and have a relationship with that. So it was a good match for me. The dancer, Zen, the physicality of Zazen. My husband, who was a writer, was totally frustrated. He was the one who brought me to Sasaki Roshi. And after a while, he said, this doesn't work for me. I said, well, it works for me. So I stayed. So making that relationship with the body as your vehicle, or I would say vessel of practice, was front and center, along with these wonderful Buddhist terms of kill the self, or Bodhidharma's disciple cutting off his arm, presenting it to Bodhidharma to show how serious he was about practice, or Gute, whose master cut his finger off when he kept repeating the one finger Zen, and going into the charnel ground. Oh, and the derogatory terms of the lump of red flesh or the skin bag. Those were often terms used in Zen koans. So it was a funny back and forth. Okay, I'm supposed to kill the self, but this is the self that's practicing and realizing and becoming aware. And certainly as a young woman, I had inherited or absorbed enough negativity about the body, about appearance, that it was easy to feed into that. Most of us are Americans here and have grown up in a culture that is really influenced by the denigration of the body. And I love the Buddhist teacher, Ken MacLeod, who once gave a talk, and he said, you have to realize that in every American household, there's a Puritan hat hanging on the wall. And I think that we have really absorbed that unconsciously. This idea of purity, and the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, and we have to beat the flesh into submission. I don't think that were in Jesus's talks per se, but I think it's what happened eventually. I think we are carrying a lot of that baggage. So now that I'm in my 70s, I figured, well, it's about time that I really decided to make friends with myself, with this body, with loving and accepting, celebrating, and being absolutely amazed at what the human body is and what it does and what this relationship is between spirit and body. Well, in some schools of thought, the body is the creation of the spirit. It's a total symbiotic relationship. And you find that in many of them, what we call mind-body practices, the body and the mind, or in Chan or Zen, it's called Shin, mind, heart. So feelings, emotions, mind are together. So I am a dancer, but I also practice Pilates. And Pilates is a modern mind-body system. Some of the ancient ones, of course, we know is yoga, Tai Chi, qigong. These are ancient mind-body systems where there is a relationship between the flesh and the spirit, so to speak, often for optimum health, but also for optimum awareness and consciousness. So some of the modern ones, of course, don't stem from those spiritual practices like the three that I talked about. Yoga, of course, from the Hindu system, and then Tai Chi and Qigong came from Taoism and was taken up by Chan, by Zen. So nowadays we have Pilates, Feldenkrais, and Alexander, which are all ways of how does the body and the mind work together? What's the relationship here? How do we optimize that relationship for a sense of well-being and health, and sometimes in Pilates, strength in old age? So I've been involved in the exploration of the relationship between mind, body, and spirit, I would say, obviously, in spiritual practice. And I'm so curious about what is evolving the one Buddhist principle that is so in your face of impermanence. And we know our cells replicate themselves completely, that this body is not the same body. It's changing all the time, though it's patterned in a certain way. And the mind also has its patterning, but we have a little more freedom to direct that patterning with awareness. And that's a lot of what spiritual practice is developing awareness. And sometimes in my mind, so to speak, I think that I'm practicing the evolution of consciousness through this medium of the human body. That's the only way it's going to evolve, change, is through this body, the human body. Oh, I did forget to say that I'm going to talk for a while, and then I really want to open it up because I know there's so much wisdom here of people who have been doing spiritual practice in their own particular human body. And I would love to hear what insights have come up. So I'm going to, as I say, talk for a little bit more and then open it up. One thing that intrigued me was the terms we use for the human body, perhaps in a more spiritual sense. The two that I've come across is the vessel or the vehicle, or both, however you want to say it. And so I thought it would be really interesting to go to my trusty Oxford English dictionary. And unfortunately, even with double magnifying glasses, I can't read the teeny print that tells you where it's evolved from. I can get definitions, but I would love to find out where these terms come from. So there's I think it's Hindu, could be Buddhist, idea of the chariot. The chariot, the vehicle, is the body. The horses that pull the chariot are the will and the energy of the human being. The driver is the ego, the personality, the self that's in connection with the world. And the passenger is the spirit self. You could think witness, spirit, self with a big S. And the idea is that that passenger is giving directions. It's giving directions to the ego, which is controlling the horses that's pulling the body. And if that self, witness, is absent, it doesn't go so well because the ego needs a little direction. What does that mean? In Buddhism, of course, there's a lot of talk about desires are bad or becoming desireless. Suffering is desire. But it's become clear as I delve deeper into Buddhism that it's not desire, it's unexamined desires. It's blind desire. It's desire with no consciousness. Desire is very important to the human self, the whole self. So the passenger needs to be giving clear directions. So in that sense, the vehicle is the modern meaning is a means of transportation, which I found a little, what's the word, a little removed or separated. It didn't seem so integrated. There's an old meaning of vehicle, which I thought was interesting. I found in the dictionary today, which is a substance or fluid that essences are dissolved in. And I thought that was very interesting in terms of medicines, the vehicle in which these essences of the medicines were dissolved in. So that led me to the word vessel. And that came up to me because a friend of mine's mother had just recently passed away. And I found this beautiful card that I picked up at the Redwood Abbey. I went on retreat. It was actually a Zen retreat at a Christian abbey, a convent. It was a beautiful picture of an oval, and little shimmers of light were coming off of it and colors were coming off of it. And the title of that picture was The Dissolving Vessel. So in that sense of the human body that is going to eventually dissolve. So that sense of dissolving. So in one of the definitions of a vessel, The vessel is said of the body as receptacle of the soul. So that's been in the Bible, it's been in many spiritual traditions. And then, of course, the one we know of, any article designed as a receptacle to hold liquid or other substance. So here's that liquid again. Usually circular structure made of durable material. I thought, well, that's a nice definition of the body. It's holding a lot of liquid. I think 95% of our body is liquid. So this idea of the vessel, and of course, it has spiritual meaning. It has, I would say, spiritual connotations. So I was playing in my mind with, do I consider my body as a vehicle or a vessel? And I thought it really changed my consciousness slightly, looking at it one way or the other. So how do we relate to this vessel or to this vehicle? A really telling point is, I want to see a show of hands here. So you're hanging up a picture and you're hammering a nail and you hit your thumb or you burn your thumb on the stove or finger. What do you do? Do you curse that? Do you come out with tons of expletives? Or do you say, oh, you poor thing, I kiss you? Okay, how many people curse? How many people are tender, like a mother to a baby who falls down and scrapes their knee? Oh, you poor thing, I'll kiss your wound. How many people do that? Okay, we got a few. Well, you actually did a study, a medical study of what happened when people were judgmental, resistant, bad at themselves. Oh, you stupid thing. How could you burn yourself on the stove? And the others were saying, oh, gosh, I'm so sorry. I really blew it. I made a mistake there. Guess what they found out? Healing was much faster on the people who were tender towards their bodies. So this is proven. So how do we cultivate that relationship of tenderness to our bodies? And of course, in Buddhism, there's so much emphasis on compassion. And we think of it as outwardly directed. We think, okay, I'm going to really feel for that person. I really understand their suffering. But are you compassionate to your own suffering, to your own flaws, to your own mistakes? Can you be tender and say, oh, gee, I was really unskillful? I love that term in Buddhism. We don't use good and bad. We use skillful and unskillful to sort of take out the judgment. And, I've been working on this for 40 years. And I must say, judgment will pop up over and over again. And I have to be like a samurai. Oh, there's our judgment again. Just because it is so ingrained in us, so ingrained. And we don't know where those voices are coming from or how it's patterned in our bodies, because our bodies are our expression. As a dancer, of course, I understand it on that kind of artistic big level, but on every level, we are the expression of our being. And do we rejoice in that or even accept? I'm getting to rejoicing because I'm 75 years old. I don't have much more time to rejoice, but just even accepting would be a wonderful first step to this relationship of spirit. Because we also know that we're not just the human body. I think all of us who've had deep meditation or some deep experiences do understand that it's not the whole picture. But this relationship is something that is either not so cultivated in spiritual practice or is actually denigrated or ignored. So I'm trying to turn in that direction more and more. And my teacher was very, very human, and we learned a lot by that. At the same time that he was endeavoring us to expand our viewpoint and to become more aware and insight and not to be so trapped by that ego driver that is not in touch with the spirit self or the witness consciousness. So when I said shin, heart, mind, feelings and emotions are very much a part of that. We love to sort of cut ourselves off from the neck down and be uncomfortable with our feelings. Certainly pain is one that we are particularly resistant to. And that is one thing that long retreats help you understand. Pain is often a communication from your body. And pay attention. What is it saying? So I'd like to read this quote. So the Roshi, most of his talks were called teishos, which were spontaneous manifestations of his understanding of these principles in a talk. He would read the koan, and some of you know the famous koans is what is the sound of one hand clapping, or why did Bodhidharma come from the West is another one. They're very culturally entangled. And then he would riff like a jazz player. He would go off from that koan and for an hour. And of course, it was really only 30 minutes because he had a translator. He never learned English. So we have to wait for the translator. But then he would often, he didn't do it later in life so much, but he would do these question answer. And this comes from his question answer. The human world is a feeling affair, but there must also be consciousness in our feeling. Where our feelings are blind, that is emotionality and just confusion. When our feelings are conscious, that is clarity and leads us to real relationship. So we should develop clarity in our lives through the exercise of consciousness and full feeling. Then we will see that there are occasions where tears are appropriate, and there are occasions where laughter is appropriate. And in any case, relationship is always appropriate. I go back and read that all the time because I think it succinctly talks a lot to me. It's okay to have these feelings, which is what it means to be in a human body. I don't think spirits, if you could see them as apart from the human body, are crying real tears or having their diaphragm going back and forth in full laughter and hara. So I have to remember I'm in the human world, not in a spirit world. So that does help me remember. So what I wanted to do is read a poem. If you know the poet David Whyte, this is his poem. And it's a rather long poem. I also go back to it because I get new insights. He talks about the carver's hands. And I've always seen it as some God figure out there. And I go, oh, wait a minute. Maybe that is me, the carver's hands. So this is called The Faces at Braga. Braga is a place in Tibet. In monastery darkness, by the light of one flashlight, the old shrine room waits in silence. While above the door, we see the terrible figure, fierce eyes demanding, will you step through? And the old monk leads us, bent back, nudging blackness, prayer beads in the hand that beckons. We light the butter lamps and bow, eyes blinking in the pungent smoke. Look up without a word. See faces in meditation. 100 faces carved above, eye lines wrinkled in the hand-held light. Such love in solid wood, taken from the hillsides and carved in silence, they have the vibrant stillness of those who made them. Engulfed by the past, they have been neglected, but through smoke and darkness, they are like the flowers we have seen growing through the dust of eroded slopes, their slowly opening faces turned toward the mountain. Carved in devotion, their eyes have softened through age, and their mouths curve through delight of the carver's hand. If only our own faces would allow the invisible carver's hand to bring the deep grain of love to the surface. If only we knew, as the carver knew, how the flaws in the wood lead his searching chisel to the very core, we would smile too, and not need faces immobilized by fear and the weight of things undone. When we fight with our failing, we ignore the entrance to the shrine itself and wrestle with the guardian, fierce figure on the side of good. And as we fight, our eyes are hooded with grief and our mouths are dry with pain. If only we could give ourselves to the blows of the carver's hands, the lines in our faces would be the trace lines of rivers feeding the sea, where voices beat, praising the features of the mountain and the cloud and the sky. Our faces would fall away until we, growing younger toward death every day, would gather all our flaws in celebration to merge with them perfectly, impossibly, wedded to our essence, full of silence from the carver's hands. And one of the most influential things when I started practice 40 years ago was Hakuin, who was a famous Zen master of Japan. He ends his song of Zazen with, "This very land is the lotus land. This very body is the Buddha body." And that always pointed me back to that direction. As much as I wanted to transcend, escape, the practice kept leading me back. Okay. Do we have any comments?
I can contribute something. As my body gets older and as I get hopefully wiser, the practice of embracing what is as it is, the aspect of seeing the limitations of the body and actually just being with that completely, not seeing that as limiting and frustrating and trying to alter it other than what's naturally arising to care for it. The embracing of what is, particularly in the body. And then the other thing I thought of is it's interesting all through my practice, even when I've been unhappy about how my body manifests or the limitations of the body, I've always had a sense, which I'm very grateful for, of the sacredness of the body. Mm-hmm. And that just seems to be an underlying teaching in all traditions, really. Sometimes you have to sift more through the Dharma of whatever tradition, but the sacredness of the human body is just true in my experience.
Thank you. And you reminded me that, as you said, we have to sift through what has come down through the ages. In Buddhism, it's called the middle way, where you don't deny the body and punish the body with extreme ascetic practices, and you don't indulge the body completely with unexamined desires and unhealthy practices. So that's called the middle way. But what does the middle way look like in 21st century civilization? It must look different than 500 BC when the Buddha started all this. I remember talking to a Zen teacher saying, I think I have to give up art. I said, what do you mean you have to give up art? Well, it's just a distraction. Well, perhaps it can be that, but perhaps it's also a source of beauty, which has always been an important part of spiritual practice. And I appreciate what you say about sifting through what we have received for thousands of years in these teachings. It must look different and feel different now. I know there's the central truth, but you started to talk about the limitations of age, and then you went on to say that by accepting it, it then was not limiting. So even the language is important. So I talk about the changes that I'm going through. Like it's a journey. Wow, this is a new change. And it's only my resistance to this part of the journey, like less energy than I used to have. I had to take more rests or naps or going, oh boy, this is really impacting my productivity. But actually, I am just loving resting. That's something I've never embraced in my whole life, is just to lie down and rest. I mean, it's a high. It's better than taking a drug and being high. Just giving your whole body to the couch or the bed and just sinking into that and just resting. I don't have to hold my body up anymore. I can rest. That was a big change for me. Because judgment will come up. Oh, you're not being too functional. If you've got to rest so much, you're not being too productive. So it interferes with a really friendly relationship with what you're going through in your human body at this point in time.
You know, my teacher would train us with some intensity to just be pretty busy. Mm-hmm. And I probably have some workaholic tendencies anyway. The tendency to be busy for its own sake, I'm learning to be suspicious of. And he even said to me at one point, I asked him about something about being able to relax. And he just looked at me and said quite loudly and firmly, he just said, relax. And so I think about that. There's also a quote I came across that I think is relevant, but I forget who said it. There is a pleasure that is exclusive to the aging process that young people will never understand. And that is the pleasure of not going. There's something about that in relationship to the world, too. Living in the world, there are many calls to action. And maintaining one's own center and not getting sucked into everything has a real value, I think.
Thank you.
And it's not the same as being lazy.
No. And don't we just call ourselves lazy so often or just judge ourselves that way? But you brought up an important point. Many of us practiced with teachers when we were younger at a certain point in our life. And the tools, the practices were very much geared to that time of our life. And to carry that 40, 50 years later into where we are now is not necessarily skillful. I mean, it can be, but I'm thinking about all the guys, mostly in my practice, it was men because it was a very intense, difficult practice. And the Roshi wanted everybody to sit in full lotus Zazen. And you do it for 18 hours. Well, you go in and out, but you do a lot. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't have a Japanese body with the short legs. It would really strain my muscle system to force myself into full lotus. And many of those men did force themselves into full lotus, and they had a lot of damage, a lot of nerve damage, and they really hurt their body by following their teacher's instruction. Whereas I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to accept that one. And it was fine. He would come in and he'd look at my posture. He'd say, oh, you're good posture. He didn't say, are you sitting full lotus? And now these men who I know in their age, they just feel like, well, I can't sit full lotus anymore. So I'm not going to get the benefit of my practice. They've left their selves, their bodies and minds back in their younger days. So I think it is important to take these teachings and get to the essence. And how does that apply now, in this time of our life, in this journey? As I look at everyone here, a lot closer to the end.
I think that the principle of we have to be somewhere else or somehow different in order to be enlightened or awakened or whatever language. As we age, I think there's so many opportunities to question that all through our lives, of course, but that's what I'm finding because where I am is where I am. And in my youth, it was like, oh, I'll get there. And now I'm starting to graciously, I hope, say, nope, I'm not going to ever get there. So how about turning it around and being exactly where I am? Because of course, in all teachings, the idea that you have to be different to be acceptable in some way is definitely worth questioning, I think.
Yes.
There's a teacher, she's a Tibetan Lama. She comes into the store where I work sometimes, and she used to give me these little pithy sayings that were very useful. And one of them is doing nothing the same as not doing anything. Being a Zen practitioner, maybe you have the answer to that. It's kind of an invitation into a way of being. And what comes up is a lot of this resistance. I only have value if I'm productive. I think that was the word you were using. If I'm productive, if I'm doing something, if I have a project, what if I don't have any of that going on? What if I can just be where I am and actually be in my body and still be with myself? That's a big practice for me right now. The body's been talking to me in ways that I haven't been really paying attention to. So maybe just having a pithy saying like that, or a koan, like you were saying, gets me to a place where I can just see what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, that's doing nothing.
Well, is doing nothing the same as not doing anything? Isn't that the idea of a koan? Is you're not really solving a problem, but you're being with the pithiness of that because it's there for a purpose. Right. If it comes from a teacher that has given you that inquiry, then there's something for me in there.
Yeah, that's a great inquiry. And when you get beyond the busyness, then you can hear the messages of the self, the body, the whole shebang, so to speak. So many of you have a meditation practice, and many people have seen meditation as a way to control your thoughts so that you don't have to deal with all those really difficult feelings and all those difficult voices in your head that are telling you you're no good and all that. Oh, I can control them with meditation, but that is not exactly what happens. In fact, sometimes you hear those voices for the first time, and then you have to breathe through it, and you need to examine, and you learn the skill set of understanding that those thoughts are not your whole being. They're just part of it.
It's just striking me about Buddha being the center of gravity. I find that having a body and being a spiritual being, it kind of is like the right hand and the left hand. It's like, I got to make an effort, but it has to be effortless. Huh? And it becomes effortless when I'm in joy and when I'm having a good time. But that's not the real point. The point is, how can I make it work when I'm not in that mood? I do have to put a little effort in order to keep on track, because eventually I need my body to be here. It's very challenging. And it's quite interesting and very beautiful to be here today, to feel not alone on this, sort of, because it does take a lot of, engaging about keeping some balance. I only have today as it is, and that makes it easier. Huh? Mm-hmm. My tendency is always into relaxation, but it's not always what I would like to have. I kind of would like also to be able to engage with the life force, which is movement. This low-key type of mood is not always where I want to be. I guess for me, the challenge here is that even if it's a little time a day, I need to make the effort to kind of like do a little movement, do a little exercise.
Well, it sounds like your body is communicating. If you feel that urge to be more outward at some point, that's a communication. Our feelings are communication, as well as the pain in your shoulder or whatever other communications you're getting from this body. The more I learn about it, I'm just, oh my gosh, how did this happen? This amazing system of cells and organs and blood. That to me is so much more awe-inspiring than some God in the sky. Now, the creative force that went into this creation, yes, okay, that's awesome. But also this manifestation of that creative force. This body is a manifestation of that. And not just us, the birds and the insects, and it's just astounding. In a way, if you can go around in a sense of stupefied wonder, it's pretty amazing. I don't get there very often, but every once in a while I do. And I was like, wow, that's amazing.
I've been thinking about this idea of doing nothing. And one of the things that I found out is that you truly can't do nothing if you don't accept what is. And doing nothing means you're actually not doing this mentation in your head, like I should get up and do something or whatever it may be. There is a stage of doing nothing where you have to find that acceptance of it. And I think that that's not a Western thought. I've spent many, many years doing Tai Chi, and I didn't find out until maybe 8 years ago or something like that, that there really is a softness in accepting what the body can do. And that has something to do with how one moves in life. Now, I feel like there's something that I want to find for myself, and it can't be found through the rushing or busyness or the mind. It's not like that. And so there is a process, I think, that we get a chance to live if we are really interested in becoming conscious.
Mm-hmm. And that was how I almost started this, with practicing the evolution of consciousness in a human body. As someone said about her spiritual practice, which was Zen at the time, I have found something that will last me my entire life. Just that focus of consciousness, of awareness, however you put it in any spiritual terms, boy, that can last you right up to the moment of your departure. So that's exciting, I think.
That poem, the part that stuck with me was the carver. Mm-hmm. And I've been working with that in the sense of my face isn't mine. The face I had as a baby wasn't mine. I didn't create it. It didn't invent it. This whole thing is in the carver's hands. However you describe the carver, this whole thing is in the carver's hands, and needs to see what is wanted and needed. Not what I want, not what I think I should do, not what the neighbor said I should do. None of that. What is wanted and needed in whatever situation, and each situation changes, and my ability to respond, it changes over time. No? If we just allow our face to be carved.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not even much of being allowed, as you're saying. It's happening.
Yeah, it's happening, but I need to allow it and drop that resistance and participate. Mm-hmm. For me, allowing is not do your will. It's like, okay, how can I participate? How can I be part of this carving process, this creation, or whatever's going on, because it is going on?
And the term that my teacher always uses is relationship. Relationship. That was the term he used, but there are many terms.
I was working with the face from that poem, and it also connects me to a mantra that Papa Ram Dass used. Mm. He described it as looking at a rose, and I use it for looking at a mud puddle or a pile of dirty dishes. It's like, Blessed art thou, little beauty, for thou revealeth the face of my beloved. Mm-hmm. And everything does. That's the face of what's going on. It's what I'm working on.
And don't we find it hard, though, to turn that towards ourselves?
Yes. Yes.
Do you think of yourself as a thing of beauty? That's the lifetime. This has been the work of many, many spiritual practitioners for a long time. Because it's all mixed up with some unskillful beliefs and practices.
Yeah. Drop the dirt. But even those are part of that carving system. Even that is part of it. Shit is that little beauty. Because it relieves the animal. It does all kinds of things. So that's where that point took me.
Lots of thoughts. I have whatever sense I have about the dilemma of being human and how to work with that. Doing nothing was mentioned. Observing, that just seems clear and such a gift to have had some contact with the teaching that so many people don't have. And at the same time, there are these dilemmas that are part of this. So 3 things occur to me. One is defensiveness is held in the body, in my body, in the body armor. I feel myself reacting. It's in the body, and I can't just drop that. I can be with it and accept it and work with it, breathe, but it's just not dropped just like that. And secondly, the whole process of socialization. I have a girl, she's a woman now, young woman. And I've worked with teenage girls in a treatment center, and they don't really feel good about their bodies overall, it seems to me. That gets in deep, it's cellular, and it's different for boys. I'm just more sensitive than I was before I got into this business that I'm in now about how girls are affected by what they're told about what they should be. And thirdly, you were saying we're not just the body. We all have some sense of that, but I'm completely identified with the body. It's like a koan. And how do you solve a koan? It's like, okay, how do I be with this body and then realize that I'm also not the body? What else is there? That's a huge question for me.
Well, in Zen, basically what a koan is can you dissolve the sense of a separate self? Can you be at one with whatever the koan is presenting? Because we need practice at that, which is the dying activity. We're all really good at the living activity. We know about that. But the dying activity, or yin and yang, expansion, contraction, living and dying. So the koan is all about practicing the dying activity. And a really skillful teacher like my teacher, he was really amazing at that. But we've all experienced this. You see a beautiful sunset. For a moment, you are completely unaware of your physical being. You are merged in that experience. You are one with the sunset. Maybe you had been hiking along and your ankle had hurt you, and you come to the beach and there's the sunset. You're not feeling that ankle anymore. The sense of the body has completely disappeared. You have dissolved into what our teacher would call the true love relationship, which is merging. Now, you can't stay there. My teacher also had a lovely saying about merging into the absolute. He's saying, well, there are no bathrooms in the absolute, and there are no restaurants. You're in a human body. You're going to have to separate again, right? And become human. But how do you separate? So many years of manifesting my koan, I was great at merging. Like when you see the pine tree, how do you realize the Buddha or the sunset or the moon or, I was great at all that. Especially I could express it in my body because I was a dancer. But when I had to go back, when that moment was over and I become me again, there was dissatisfaction. There was dukkha. This, ooh, I don't like being in my human body. Can I just merge forever with the pine tree? That's bliss. That was beautiful. So I had the opposite problem. Being human was much, much harder for me than the merging. Yeah.
But it seems, if I'm to believe the traditions and actually my own eyes in having seen certain teachers, it seems like it's possible to live in the merged state while in a body.
Yes, there are a few exceptions. Yes. And they do that to show you to manifest that state. You're thinking of the yogi Ram Samat Kumar, for instance, or some of the amazing yogis. Yes, they can stay at that state, but they still have to go to the bathroom. I mean, still have to eat. Maybe not. Some of them go to the point where they're living on air, but that's pretty rare.
No, but the context of it, going to the bathroom, relaxing.
Yes, and they're showing that you could live in a unified state. But, I think those are kind of the exceptions, not the rules. But what I was realizing is for 20 years, I would come back to my body or come back to myself and be ashamed that I was back in my human body, or I'm not good enough, or I thought I answered that koan really well, but maybe it wasn't really the best answer. And finally, after 20 years, my teacher was very patient. After 20 years, I manifested my koan, not so skillfully. And he looked at me and I looked at him and we burst out laughing. And I realized I finally was able to be myself and be okay with that. And be okay with being back to Ginny in the human body. So some people have the opposite problems. Like my husband would say, I cried going up to the mountain, to Mount Baldy, because he knew it was going to be difficult and he'd have to really work hard and it was painful and it was cold. And I cried when I had to go back down into the world. Keep me up at the mountain. So obviously the universe understood what my path should be. So 3 children. No way am I going to go up to that mountain for any length of time. And I'm very grateful for that because I learned much more in my integrated world and also had the wonderful experience of being able to work with a teacher and get these practices that I can finally use to truly love and accept myself. Because I feel like once you can have such really great self-compassion, then it just spills out to other people. Oh, yeah, other people are in fear like I was, or other people are denigrating themselves like I did. Other people are under that awful judge that's always whispering in their ear, they're not good enough. So once you see that for yourself and accept it and be with it just as it is, then you're so much more patient and kind with other people, I think. So I did want to also talk to you about what lives in your body. Like you said, the defensiveness, you're not going to get rid of it. Those things that were imprinted in your cellular system, when the cells recreate, they remember and they keep that pattern. And I will share this one story. So you got the idea that I was not so happy with my human self. When I first came to the Zen Center, whatever the text was of that 7-day session or whatever I had read, kill the self, right? So I decided one of my trips in, because you go 4 times a day to see the Zen master, I was going to just do it. I didn't know what that meant or anything, but the ego self had given the message to the body. We were going to go in there and die. We're going to die. You wait at this bell. You're waiting to hear that the teacher's interview with the other student is over. They ring a bell. He's in a little cabin. And then you ring the big concho bell to say that you're coming. It's kind of a ritual. It's a nice ritual. So there I am, and my heart is going a million zillion miles an hour because my body is believing that it's going to go in there and die. And so I ring the bell, I go in there, and you do all your bows, and then I stand up, and I fainted. I just fainted. Next thing I knew, the teacher's holding me and saying Zazen, which means breathe, breathe. So I started breathing again. And then the poor guy was asking about my heart every time I went in. Are your heart okay? Is it okay? 40 years later, sitting at that concho bell, now my teacher's even gone, and I'm going in to see another teacher. My heart starts to race. 40 years later, after that experience, every time I sat at the concho bell, my heart would start to race because it remembered. It wasn't the same heart, but the cells had gotten that message. This being was going to go in there. So it was scared. And then, of course, I just have to breathe through it and say, it's okay. It's okay. We're all right. Calm down. So I totally understand trauma that lives in people. I mean, that was a weird, mild trauma. Can you imagine what real trauma is? That's in your cellular system, and you have to make a relationship with it. Hopefully a friendly relationship, a caring relationship. But that's part of what I was saying about the evolving, changing relationship with your body. It doesn't have to get stuck back in that fear zone or the defensive zone. It can evolve. And, I think we're all afraid of being narcissists or something. If we really appreciate this body, but narcissists is the opposite. They are not friends with their body. It's the opposite of the coin of truly tender, loving relationship with the self. So I don't think any of you will become narcissists if you become really friendly with your body. And remember, next time you burn your finger, poor finger, I'm so sorry. I guarantee you it will heal much faster.
Yeah, Ginny, this person was in a state where they didn't feel pain. Their fingers got caught. Yeah, I get the whole thing about disidentification, but it was hard for me to embrace this possibility. What they were saying is if you're fully in the present, then you wouldn't experience pain. I couldn't find a place where that resonated for me.
No, that's called disassociation. Pain is very essential. You don't want to keep mangling your hand. It's telling you, get out of there. But it's afterward that you want to be tender. I remember reading in a wonderful book of Stephen Levine, who did a lot of healing work with people, who talked about this woman who had a lot of trauma, and she did not feel her body very well. She had disassociated from her body because of her trauma. But she had been going through this healing work with Stephen Levine, and she said she'd gone to some workshop where everybody was learning how to be in these exalted, ecstatic states. And she said she realized that her miracle was that she could be in her body again after years of being disassociated. So it's a beautiful miracle to truly experience this body. And it's not always pleasant, that's for sure. But even the uncomfortable things remind you, hey, I'm alive for a little longer.
Yeah, I really appreciate the teaching where you experience the non-duality, but then you embrace going back into the duality and you use that for your sadhana. So it's like your teacher said, where, okay, there are no bathrooms and there are no restaurants. We have to go back into the body. So why not use that for our relationship to the divine?
That's all we got. We're not disembodied spirits yet.